Mrs Hermans.
Thank you, Mr President. And it is with a heavy heart that I rise to support Dr Heath's emergency management petition in this House today. I consider it a privilege, and I want to acknowledge the victim's family in the gallery today and to extend my condolences and the condolences of all of the Liberal Party colleagues on your very deep and very personal loss. Under this Labor government, the state of Victoria stands alone in its appalling use of legislation like the emergency management days, which benefits is too small a word. It compensates violent criminals. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's actually rewarding violent criminals, and it's putting our Victorian community and our families at risk. Other states and jurisdictions overseas have various approaches to good behaviour by prisoners, or even special rules that were put in during the COVID pandemic. However, nearly all interstate and many international laws specifically exclude violent or high-risk offenders. Now, these laws were designed to specifically reduce prison populations and reduce infections during COVID. And I note they were applied largely to prisoners in specific circumstances. These circumstances included prisoners who were already about to be released, who had committed minor crimes and had shorter sentences, and had sensible limits on the amount of prison time that these prisoners could have deducted. In New South Wales, special laws for prisoners were introduced during the COVID period. However, those charged with murder, serious sex offences, terrorism, and those who were jailed for life, in short, those who were classed as a serious offender, were disqualified in New South Wales. And by 2023, the New South Wales government had repealed these laws and entirely, completely, to ensure that not a single prisoner was being released. In the United Kingdom, only prisoners who were deemed to be low-risk offenders and were within weeks of their release dates were allowed to be released. But they were also electronically tagged and temporarily released in stages. Under the UK system, offenders could still be recalled at the first sign of concern, and violent and sexual offenders and those of security concern were not considered. Now, France took action to release prisoners who had less than 2 to 6 months remaining on their sentence, but only if the offender had not been charged with acts of terrorism, domestic violence, or a violent crime. There are a wide variety of examples in the United States of prisoners receiving either prison reductions or early release during COVID. But these were primarily aimed at those who had been charged but were not yet convicted, or who were serving shorter sentences. Near the end of their sentence, jailed for parole violation, or were incarcerated for non-violent and non-sexual offences. Even the left-wing state of California had limitations on how many day credits prisoners could rack up, limiting it to only 12 weeks, with less day credits for those who were convicted of violent offences. And California, I might add, only considered early release for prisoners on the provision that they would, and I quote, "not pose an unreasonable risk of violence to the community." None of these reasonable limitations exist in our state of Victoria. Under this government, under this incompetent, selfish Labor government, crime rates are soaring, violent criminals are roaming our streets, and our everyday law-abiding silent majority of Victorians are increasingly at risk in our public spaces and in our homes. This Labor Victorian government's only limit for day credits is based on whether an offender has misbehaved while in prison. Victoria is a dangerous state under the Allan Labor government's irresponsible laws, and it's failing to consider what violence and violent offences do to put the offender in prison in the first place, or what might occur when these offenders are released. It's simply not optional. It's simply not optional for this government to turn its back and say, we are discussing, we are considering. It's simply not good enough. You must change these laws. Thank you.